Bill's family and friends our deepest sympathy and the promise of our continued prayers and support. I asked Dorothy to tell me some things about Bill, and her first words to me were, he was a real flirt. She went on to say he was a hugger. Bill was a gifted salesman. He could talk to anybody, and he could talk anyone into anything. She said, use the words, he had a gift of gab. He sold insurance, chainsaws, small engines, building supplies, and much more. And as I say this, I'm hoping that he wasn't selling insurance and chainsaws at the same time. If there were people around and it was time to leave, Dorothy would say, Bill, we gotta go. And Bill's response was always what? Just a minute. Dorothy said you didn't want to take him to the grocery store with you because he would be talking to people whether he knew them or not, and she always had to go looking for him. Bill loved sweets. He would eat dessert before dinner if he could. He also loved animals, those wild critters, and especially his dogs. He had a workshop full of tools for woodworking. He made lots of picture frames for Dorothy's wonderful artwork and built many other items. He's also involved in the construction of their home. Perhaps you've seen the picture of Bill that was up here, and it's downstairs now, will be down during the mealtime. It was a wonderful display, but the one where he's in his Navy uniform. When I saw it yesterday, I thought it was a kid picture, you know, where a child gets their picture taken in a Navy outfit or whatever. No, it was his picture of the Navy. What a young-looking kid he was. But in spite of that, he was in the Navy, and he served 4 years as a minesweeper. I asked Dorothy how they met, and she told me that it was through the USO. Bill liked to say, and I think I'm quoting him, he went for a free meal, and he got Dorothy. Prior to marrying Bill, Dorothy said that she would never marry a man who couldn't dance. Well, guess what? Dorothy said it looked more like contortions than dancing. But Bill thought he was Fred Astaire. Dorothy and Bill's was a whirlwind courtship. Actually, not much time spent together beforehand, but after he got his parents' permission, because he was only 19 at the time, marriages lasted over 61 years. And this in spite of their very different personalities. One example is his proclivity to procrastinate. He'd say, I'll get to it later. You know how that felt for Dorothy, who likes things done right away. I know that Bill loved his family, certainly his wife and his children and his grandchildren. And had he been well, he surely would have enjoyed being a great-grandfather. Bill showed a lot of concern for other people. He was involved in the community in so many ways, especially in the Lions. He always wanted to help others. For myself, I will remember Bill as being very friendly and good-humored. When I came nearly 5 years ago, Bill was serving as the head usher on Saturday nights. He was also one of the very first readers and communion ministers here at St. Albert's. He was the sacristan for the Saturday night masses. That would be, he got the vessels ready, the wine ready, the bread ready, and all of that ready for Mass, and helped afterwards with cleanup. As Bill was starting to show signs of dementia, he would get a little mixed up sometimes, and so we had to get a little creative with the scheduling and keeping him involved, because he wanted so much to be involved. But there was a point, and I told Dorothy the story, that one night I wasn't sure when he did the setup for Mass if the host had come out of the cupboard where they should have come for the Mass to be in the back to be brought up as the gifts. But I kind of suspected they came out of the tabernacle. They had no real way of knowing, so either Jesus was already consecrated and he was reconsecrated or whatever. So after that, I would just scoot over here before Dorothy and Bill would get here, and I'd get it set up, and I'd say, oh, Bill, I already got it done. And he was okay with that. But he so much wanted to stay involved. I think of that, you know, that change and how hard that must have been for Bill to step back from doing things that he loved, things of service. Certainly driving was one of those that was quite challenging. And for some time now, Bill would say that he wanted to go home. Perhaps he was thinking of his home that he grew up in Utica, New York. Or maybe it was the home that he helped build here in Land O'Lakes. But having spoken with Dorothy over the past week, we believe it might have been his home with the Lord that had been prepared for him for all eternity. Dorothy told me that when Bill was driving, he would never stop and ask for directions. They could be driving in circles. They were late for a wedding and all kinds of things because he would insist that he knew where he was going. He didn't. But this time, I think he actually did know where he was going. We heard in the first reading from Ecclesiastes, there's a time for everything. Bill, while being a procrastinator, I think was in tune with God's time, and he was ready to go home. Just as St. Paul told us in that second reading, for Bill's earthly dwelling, St. Paul called it a tent, his body was declining, and so Bill was ready to leave the body and go home to the Lord. And we heard that again in the gospel. Jesus assures us in the gospel that he's prepared a place for us. Jesus tells us that he is the way. Bill knew Jesus as his Lord and Savior. He also knew Jesus as his friend. And while Bill was not so willing to ask for directions in this life, I'm quite certain that this last week, he let Jesus show him the way home. We know that because of the dementia that Bill suffered with, the road has had many twists and turns these past several years. But today, we can celebrate the fact that Bill is with the Lord. He is finally home. I can't help but think that if Bill was able to communicate with us here, salesman that he was, he would want to sell us all on the idea of having our home in heaven too someday.